Hello, I'm Michelle Larander, Director of the USC Center for Health Journalism. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to our Health Matters webinar covering coronavirus. Young journalists share stories of pandemic life and systemic racism. Today, we'll hear from three young journalists from around the country at an extraordinary and difficult time for their generation. Young people have seen their lives upended during the COVID-19 pandemic. High school seniors saw their proms and senior traditions canceled, and as the fall school term got underway, university life has been disrupted, with some colleges suffering the consequences of a botched reopening and many campus classes either canceled or moved online. Meanwhile, many young people are experiencing the economic strain of the pandemic as families struggle to pay bills. It's a time of great uncertainty that takes a mental health toll, and that's not all. Many young people feel they must take a stand during our nation's reckoning with systemic racism and police violence. Join us right now as we hear insights that may challenge your assumptions about Generation Z. You can tweet about this webinar at the hashtag YouthMedia. This event was made possible thanks to support of the California Endowment. We'll be hearing from Riley Lockett today, who has worked in video journalism for 5 years and is a contributing journalist with YR Media. With a focus on culture and politics, he uses his unique perspective to give light to a wide range of issues. With an audience of mostly young adults, his work is delivered in a clear, matter-of-fact language that allows people of any age to understand complex ideas. Born and raised in Oakland, California, he is currently based in Manhattan, pursuing an undergraduate degree in film and TV production at NYU. Paige Mastin is a senior at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, studying journalism and economics. She currently serves as opinion editor at the Daily Tar Heel, UNC's independent student newspaper. Her interests and past experience include work at the North Carolina General Assembly and research on student mental health. And we'll also hear from Amora Campbell, a high school senior at the Richard Wright Public Charter School for Journalism and Media Arts, and a student journalist at the Urban Health Media Project in Washington, D.C. Her career interests include public policy, sustainability, and journalism. A word about our rules of engagement today. This webinar is on the record, but because we're hearing from young journalists, we'll ask any of you who want to quote to get in touch with us, and we will forward your questions or comments to our youth journalists. You can reach us at editor@centerforhealthjournalism.org. Another word about our format today. We'll be hearing from our speakers first, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions. Because we have many people participating in the webinar, we'll ask you to write your questions into the Q&A panel of Zoom. You can also write us there if you're experiencing technical problems, and we will be archiving this webinar at centerforhealthjournalism.org. Let's get started by having each of you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your involvement with journalism. Why don't we start with you, Amora?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I'm a senior at my high school, Richard Wright Public Charter School. I have basically just loved journalism since 9th grade. I was approached by Jane O'Donnell with Urban Health Media Project, where we basically get to write about any issue that we really care about, anything that comes to mind about what's affecting our community and that people, that we love and communicate with on a daily basis. And just the freedom and the ability to really share what you love is just so amazing to me, because you get to basically reach so many people about your own life and the life of people around you. And it's like you're getting, it's an accomplishment. You're getting paid to do it. And I just can't believe that I actually get rewarded for doing this amazing thing, every day. So yeah.
Thank you, Amora. And let's hear from you, Riley.
Like she said, I'm Riley Lockett. I'm a sophomore at NYU pursuing a degree in filmmaking and television production. And I first got introduced to journalism in high school when I joined YR Media, which is a youth-based production company in Oakland, California, where I was born and raised. And yeah, I just always loved the feeling of spreading truth and awareness through film.
Thank you. And Paige, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm Paige Mastin. I'm a senior at UNC Chapel Hill studying journalism and economics, and currently I'm the opinion editor at the Daily Tar Heel, where I've worked for about 3 years on the opinion desk, and I just kind of also have some experience with writing and reporting at other organizations at UNC, and it's just one of my passions to just kind of tell stories and fight for accountability and truth from various institutions and people in power.
Thank you. So we'll get started with our questions. The pandemic has overtaken all of our lives, and I wanted to hear from each of you and how it has affected you as students and in your personal lives. I'd like to start with Paige because this has also made its way into your journalism. In your case, you wrote about this question about the pandemic and student life in an op-ed that really went viral across the country from the Daily Tar Heel. And you really provided a pretty searing indictment of your school's handling of the pandemic, titled, "We All Saw This Coming, Clusterfuck," and then went on to define that as a complex and utterly disordered and mismanaged situation. What was going on and how was it affecting you and your fellow students?
Yeah, so at the Daily Tar Heel, our job really is to kind of speak to how students are thinking and feeling. And with the kind of mess that happened with our whole reopening situation, we definitely were feeling pretty angry. We were kind of feeling like we were used as an experiment to kind of see if reopening would work in higher education, but kind of just in general throughout the country. But being used, I guess, kind of as lab rats was not, or guinea pigs was not really something that we ever really consented to doing. And that has had real consequences for students. There's been like really tremendous mental health impacts, but also just financial impacts and academic impacts. It's been really tough for everybody. And I think the most frustrating part is just that it was also preventable because from the very beginning, when the pandemic began and the university was planning for the semester, students and faculty and staff were really asking the university not to proceed with the reopening plan that it had in place and to kind of take more precautions to make sure that everybody in the community could come back to campus safely, but they largely ignored that. So I think that's why we were also angry and frustrated, because it felt kind of manipulative, because the university would constantly say that they were doing it for the best interest of the community. But I think that's hard to kind of uphold when everybody in the community is asking you to do the opposite of what you're doing. So it's hard to say that you're acting in their best interest when they're telling you what their interests are and you're ignoring it. So I think that that has been really frustrating. And obviously, we can't undo the fact that that whole mess happened, but I think all we've really been asking for is just some accountability and some responsibility from the university going forward, but we haven't gotten that, and we're kind of having to live with the impacts of that decision even today. And so I think it's been just really tough for everybody.
Thank you, Paige. And Amora, you're dealing with a different challenge. You're a high school senior. This is supposed to be your year. So how has this affected you and your classmates?
So, one, we got prom canceled, so that sucks. Our graduation will only have 2 guests there, which is contrary to the usual 5 or 10 you would like to invite. Basically, our entire senior year, here's how I can best sum it up. If I watch a High School Musical movie, I will literally cry because everything it feels like it's just been taken away from me. Like I know like 2020, they struggled a lot, but they at least had hope that that they would be able to have all the joys of senior year. We've basically been told, no, you're not going to have anything, because if you try to have fun, you will literally die. You'll be endangering people that you love. So, and your teachers who don't deserve it, and your other classmates who really don't deserve it. And it's been a test of like not being selfish and not trying to encourage people to endanger themselves. But it's also just been like trying to figure out what you value the most. Like, do you value having fun and partying and seeing your friends and not being lonely all the time? Or do you value keeping people safe and keeping your community safe? And I think that's what it really comes down to when you're looking at like all the lost opportunities that we're dealing with this year, because we can keep in contact with that with our peers, but you're kind of finding out who are your friends and who are the people that you're kind of like friends by convenience with. And then there's also helping relationship with your teachers. There's also just trying to handle all the stresses of applying to college. And we have SATs in like a week or so, and it's just like a lot of things are surprising. If you have technical difficulties, you're not prepared at all for that. Like it was very short notice. I have something due today that is just extremely important for like this huge scholarship, and I got the email literally yesterday because it was sent a week ago, but then my email crashed. So then what happened was now I'm not prepared. So it feels like you're alone, but it's all about communication and having the technology together, but it's just not that easy for everyone. So it's really hard, especially when most of my classmates are from Ward 7 and 8, which are like the most majority low income neighborhoods. So it's significantly harder for us as well.
And Amora, that's in Washington, D.C., Ward 7 and 8.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Riley, what kind of conversations are you having with your friends about this extraordinary year? And how are you feeling?
Honestly, we're not really having much conversations, to be honest, because it's sort of redundant. It feels redundant to talk about it with your friends since everybody's going through the same thing. So all you can say is, wow, this is awful, isn't it? And they say, yes, it is. And then we change the topic. But I count myself as one of the lucky ones, even though I'm kind of losing my mind. I count myself lucky because this semester I was able to be roommates with a good friend of mine from my freshman year. And we decided to be roommates before all this COVID stuff happened. So I'm just thinking about all my friends who are roomed with complete strangers this semester and have to be in such like tight living conditions with them. And going off of what Amora said about having the utilities to attend your classes, there was a time in the beginning of the semester where half the students didn't have good internet, not because of their own fault, but because we were all using NYU Wi-Fi. And since every single student is trying to like live stream at the same time, it would crash every class. So then they said students had to go out and buy Ethernet cables that they weren't providing, I don't think, unless I'm mistaken. But yeah, now that people have Ethernet cables, it's sort of leveling out, but there's still technical difficulties that we're still trying to navigate through since the students and teachers are both in the weeds a bit. So it's sort of a learning process for everyone.
Thank you. And you're not just dealing with COVID-19. This is really a moment where we're all experiencing twin pandemics and addressing not just COVID-19, but a kind of national reckoning around systemic racism. How has that other pandemic affected you? Why don't we start with you, Amora?
Sure. Okay. So I've been to one protest, and the reason for that is I basically had to do an internal debate. I live with my 91-year-old aunt, and she has congestive heart failure, and she also has a bunch of other pre-existing conditions that would basically destroy her if she ever had COVID. So I had to think about whether I would go out and protest and exercise my right in the Constitution, or I would, go say that I do not believe in racism and go with my brothers and sisters from all over America and just say this is wrong, or would I take care of my sick aunt and basically protect her and make sure that her life is preserved for as long as possible. And I chose to stay with my aunt and take care of her because I couldn't see myself living like that where I didn't have her. And I also knew that there was a lot of different ways where I can make a difference in my community without having to physically go out and protest. I know protesting is really important though. People should still continue to do it. But there are a lot of different ways where you can get involved with it. And I think that's really important as well if you really have to make that hard choice. So at the protest, it was the day before Donald Trump walked out, tear gassed people, and held up a Bible upside down in Lafayette Square. So the day before, we were peacefully protesting. We were saying, this is a peaceful protest, literally chanting it from the top of our lungs. My voice was sore the next day, and people were throwing water bottles. So that was the very most anyone was doing. And we were literally saying, if you see the person throwing water bottles, you better tell them to stop, and they got to go, because this is a peaceful protest. So basically, they stopped doing that. And the police officers just launched tear gas at everyone. They launched tear gas, and it was horrible. I've never seen what tear gas looked like. I've never encountered it before. I just knew it made your eyes hurt. And I saw people on the streets just like pouring milk all over themselves. It was just so horrible. It reminded me of like a war scene I would see in a movie. And I couldn't believe that that was my actual life. And it was a horrifying experience. So then we walked up the street to meet other protesters, to peacefully protest with them and just do a simple march. Police officers were standing there stopping anyone from just like peacefully assembling, which is literally, I mean, it's in the Constitution. And what happened was we were saying, let us peacefully protest, and we kneeled down. And the police officers kneeled down with us. And I was in the very front. And I was face to face with officers who were on our side, who believe Black lives do matter and that people should not be murdered for no reason at all. And I mean, like, it's just, and it was amazing. It was a beautiful moment. And I feel like that was like it was like kind of representing, I love America, because even if you're on opposite sides, you can agree with each other and you can really confront the issues when you're on like totally opposite side, like Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter. And then there were police officers who were still standing up, and I was like, that's terrible, but I'm focused on this guy who's agreeing with me right now. And then we all stood up, and people were still kneeling down. I was still kneeling down. And then there were just like tear gas launchers everywhere. All around the streets, people were just launching tear gas. I mean, it was insane. It seemed like they were launching like 15 things of tear gas. I mean, it was just everywhere. If you looked up in the sky, you couldn't see what was in front of you. You couldn't see the next person. So we were just trying to run, but then someone was like holding me back. They're like, no, we got to stay up here. And I stood up there, and thankfully I didn't get tear gas in my eyes, so they were launching at people who were farther away trying to protect themselves. But it's insane that that is how our country responds in the nation's freaking capital to Black Lives Matter and peaceful protesting and kneeling when police officers and peaceful protesters are agreeing with each other. So that was my experience. And it just angered me so much that like I really didn't feel like safe enough for my aunt to go out there again, because I wanted to show them the peace of my mind. And then when I saw Trump do that the next day, it made me so mad. It made me livid.
Thank you, Amora, for sharing that. And Riley, I know that you also had to juggle for yourself this debate about COVID risks and protesting, and what did you ultimately decide?
Well, I made two decisions at two different times in my life. Over the summer, I was in a similar situation as Amora. I was living back home, and my 98-year-old grandfather lives with us. And I decided he's at risk because he's almost like a century old, but like he doesn't have many like immune failures or anything. So I decided to go out and protest, and that was difficult on a personal level, because every time I came home, I had to like shelter myself on the other side of the house from him. And we often like to like talk and hang out and stuff. So that was a difficult time, but I felt like I just felt like I had to do something. And then at the beginning of the semester, when I came to New York, then I decided to spend more time going out to protest. And that's become a bit of an issue with me and my mother, because she's worried about me as a young Black man. She's worried about my safety. Now that she's on the other side of the country, she can't protect me as well as she used to. So it's become difficult for me to try to explain the idea that for me personally, I can't live with myself if I don't go out there and fight for what I believe in.
Thank you. And Paige, you've been to a lot of protests too, and seen some things that you found and experienced some things that you found troubling. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think I kind of had a similar experience to Amora, where I attended a protest that where the protesters themselves, like they weren't inciting violence. Like it was largely peaceful, and it was just people just trying to speak up and express themselves. But the police mostly the police escalated it, and the protesters were tear gassed and they were shooting rubber bullets. And it was just really frustrating to see the way that the police just responded, because it just kind of emphasized the reason why we were protesting in the first place, is just the fact that is the police. That's how the police respond to issues like this, when they just use excessive force when there's no reason to. So I think that more than anything, it's been really interesting to see the ways that I guess these twin pandemics converge. I mean, like systemic racism isn't like a new pandemic. Like it's something that like Black Americans have been experiencing forever. But I think that when you introduce COVID into the equation, a lot of people a lot of white Americans realize how inadequate our systems really are, because when people are sick, when they're financially struggling because of a pandemic, the systems that are supposed to be there to help them, like healthcare, welfare, you see how the systemic racism is built into those systems, because just the way that they aren't getting the help that they need, because those systems don't care about them, I think is something that's really important. And I think that is probably why people are, I guess, waking up and deciding that they care about this other pandemic now, because it's kind of been pretty impossible to ignore, even though it's been there all along. I think now people are realizing that they can't just pretend it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, go ahead, Riley. Oh, you're muted.
So I was trying to remember what I was going to say earlier, and I forgot, but now I remember. Okay, so one thing I wanted to say is that there's this idea that the media portrays on both sides of the media, that a lot of the protests are like random or disorganized. And while they mostly are decentralized, that does not mean they are unorganized. And at the protests I've been to, especially here in Manhattan, I'm taken back by how well put together these protests are. Like at a recent one, we were marching from Brooklyn over the bridge into Manhattan. And once we got to the bridge, the leaders of the protest told everyone who brought bicycles to block the path of the cars so that the people on foot could walk in. And we organized to make sure half the protests went on one side of the bridge and half went on the other. So it's not like people are just going out walking in random places or doing random acts of violence. There's clear plans and decision makings going on by committee in these protests of like hundreds of people. And so just because something's decentralized and there's no like Antifa headquarters that some people actually think exists, just because there's no like HQ or anything doesn't mean there's not a clear unity of ideals.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an important point in light of some of the commentary flying around last night during the presidential debate. All three of you have mentioned as part of this question about attending protests, weighing health concerns. And I think that some people might find that surprising, because there's a kind of reputation that young people have, come to have during this pandemic of being somewhat indifferent about health concerns and taking risks and being responsible for spreading COVID. And there's even a phrase that had been used predating COVID to describe young people and how invulnerable they feel, that they've been called young invincibles for not wanting to get health insurance, for example. And I just wanted to ask each of you what your responses to these attitudes and whether you yourself feel invincible. Amora, do you want to start us off on that?
Sure. I feel disgusted by it. It makes me feel sick to my stomach. It makes me feel like my generation is being poorly represented, because when you are refusing to wear a mask, you're basically saying, you know what, Donald Trump kind of has a point. Like, that's what I'm seeing. Like, I know there's a lot of different sides to it, but like, I'm seeing you not wearing a mask, you not trying the best you possibly can to stop a pandemic. It makes me feel, and then like with the term young invincibles, I am a part of that group just because of my age, and I completely disagree with them. So to be grouped in with people who are not trying to do the very best they can to stop a pandemic, or not trying to take the like height of safety concerns they possibly can take. Like, if you don't have the materials, you don't have the materials. But if you do, please, please, please do something about that, because it is your duty as a citizen, as a human being, to try to protect and help other human beings. And when you are basically saying that you're invincible by it because you are less susceptible to die from it, I mean, it just makes me feel honestly disgusted and ashamed.
Yeah, thank you, Amora. Paige, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I definitely don't feel like I'm invincible. And I mean, even if I were invincible, like, there are plenty of other people who aren't. And my community isn't invincible, and I have a responsibility to them as well as to myself, just to stay safe and be cautious, because that's the right thing to do. And I think it just like boils down to like a me versus us mentality. Like, you can't just be thinking about how doing something will affect you. Like, you're constantly, when you go to the grocery store, when you go out to other places, you're coming into contact with people without even realizing it, and the decisions that you make like can affect so many people, and you may not even know it. So I think that we just have a responsibility to be mindful of other people and realize that our actions affect others as well as ourselves. But I also think that there's a lot of criticism directed at young people for thinking they're invincible and going out and partying, but also it's really not just young people. It's people who are much older than that as well. I mean, one of the candidates for governor in my home state of North Carolina says that if he's elected, he's going to end the mask mandate because he thinks that it's not necessary, and that we don't need to be walking around wearing masks because it's encroaching on our freedom. So I think that it's important to know that it's not, I think it's less of a generational thing that young people are more likely to be careless. I think it's more just like kind of a, do you care about other people or do you not? So I think that that's important to note, is like, I feel like while there are plenty of young people that are feeling invincible, that it's not really fair to just throw them under the bus, because it's there are plenty of older people who are thinking and feeling and doing the same things.
Thank you. Riley, did you want to add your thoughts on this?
Yes, like I agree with what Paige was saying about how it's sort of not really a youth-focused thing. It's sort of all ages, but I also think it's the way that the people in power are communicating the threat level of the disease to the greater population. Like, especially earlier in the year, like March or April, I remember like viral clips of young people at spring break being like, oh, if I get COVID, I'm going to catch COVID. It's not a big deal. And a lot of people were pointing to that and being like, see, young people are stupid and bad. We got them. But it was more a sign of how in a country like ours, where despite being branding ourselves as like independent free thinkers, a lot of people still look to those people in positions of power and authority for the right way to live their lives. When you have people like President Donald Trump, who totally disregarded the COVID virus for a long time while people were dying in the earlier stages. That communicated to a lot of Americans that this isn't that big of a deal. And especially, you don't really see, it's not like we see people on the street dying of COVID. They're often in hospitals trying to be secluded for the safety of everyone, but that has the adverse effect of making it feel like it's off their, it's not like urgent, if that makes sense. Sort of the same way people think about climate change, even if people agree that climate change and COVID are real issues, since it's not in your face the way a wildfire is or the way a hurricane is, it's treated as important but not urgent. So you can put it on sort of like on the back burner or something.
Go ahead, Amora.
So I want to go back to what Riley was saying about Donald Trump ignoring the virus and, well, not really preparing Americans for it. And there was a point in the debates last night where basically it was this whole thing like, should Donald Trump be blamed for, all these Americans dying and things like that? We are like dying disproportionately to the rest of the world. And COVID is the third biggest killer of Americans, and we've only had it for 9 months. So it's just, I mean, if you want to blame one person, if you want to blame other people, you can blame however many people you want. But the fact is, Americans are dying, and it's a huge number, and it shouldn't be that big. It's like over 200,000 people are dying, and it's just we have to stand up, and we have to be able to say, you know what, as an individual, as an independent person, I have to decide to take care of other people. I have to decide to use my PPE. I have to decide to make a change in my community. And I think that's such an important conversation. I agree with my fellow panelists saying, there are people from all other ages talking about, doing things that are wrong. And it's because there's a mindset that it's not that big of a deal, like Riley was saying. And you have to be responsible as an American, as a human being, as a parent, as a daughter, as a son, as whoever, because your community depends on you to be a responsible person during this time.
Thank you. Go ahead, Riley.
So I just, that reminded me of another thing. Thank you, Amora. That was an excellent point. It also reminded me of, we live in a society, at least in America, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but American society is very individualist. People have this mindset of, well, if it's not going to help me, then why bother? Like, I see a lot of people online who say things like, well, the masks aren't really protecting me, they're protecting everyone around me, so why on earth would I wear them? Despite the fact that if everyone wore them, they'd be protecting you too. But even beside that, people believe that if there's not an immediate benefit to themselves, then it's just a waste of time. And it frustrates me that because there are people who are either extremely susceptible to COVID or can't wear a mask because of other reasons. For example, I encountered a protest outside of City Hall last week or 2 weeks ago about ending solitary confinement. And a woman who survived solitary confinement got on the mic and spoke about how she can't wear a mask because in solitary, they forced her to wear a mask 24/7 for 3 years, and that caused her skin to break out and all different types of trauma to happen to her. So now whenever she puts on a mask, she hyperventilates and has a panic attack. So I think about how all these people who are saying they can't breathe with the mask have no idea what it means to not be able to breathe wearing a mask. And if they were to wear the mask, then people like this woman who survived solitary, she would be a lot safer not wearing a mask, and she would be seen as a general exception. And I just think about how she must face a lot of vitriol on the street, people thinking she's probably an anti-masker for going into grocery stores and doing all these things without wearing a mask, despite the fact that she is one of the few examples of an actual medical condition that stops her from wearing a mask, the same thing that these people claim to have all the time.
Thank you, Riley. You mentioned the phrase that has now become something seared in all of our memories, I can't breathe. Of course, that's the phrase that we've heard in connection with the police killing of George Floyd. And I wanted to ask you a question in your role as young journalists, because this whole conversation we're having, this really difficult conversation in our country about systemic racism and police violence, has also prompted a number of journalists across the country to renew a kind of conversation about whether journalists should be objective. And I was wondering, for all of you, as you're starting out your careers, where you come down on that issue? And maybe Riley, we'll start with you on that, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. As a journalist, I have a lot of difficulty trying to stay objective because I'm a very opinionated person. And whenever I cover a story, I feel a need to share my opinions. But I also think that there is a place and time for opinions in journalism. Like, I think there's a way where you can have like a news report and an op-ed in the same story, as long as you make it clear to your audience that, okay, this is what happened. Now I'm going to tell you my personal perspective on it, and make sure that's clearly communicated to your audience. But I also feel like many journalists or at least many people who critique journalists have this false idea of objectivity as equally viewing both sides of a conflict, when that's not really what journalistic objectivity is meant to be in the first place. What it's meant to be is revealing the truth. And if one side values the truth more than another side, then that's not the journalist being dishonest or biased by reporting the facts. That's just them doing their job. And it frustrates me to see people point to journalists doing their job and say, oh, that's biased, that's liberal media. And it's also like, I feel like it's okay for some journalists to be biased, as long as they're clear about where their biases lie. Like me personally, I am biased. I am on support of the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously. So in my journalism, I try to be biased towards that side to show that perspective, and try to interview people on the street about their views on Black Lives Matter from the protests, and try to show sides of the protest that people often don't see. So I think that's where my bias shows, but my bias is still, at least in my opinion, trying to show the truth.
Thank you, Riley. And we'll go to Paige next, since she has her hand up.
Yeah, I think one of the points that Riley made kind of points out like what my problem is with objectivity mostly is that like that people are made to feel that thinking that Black Lives Matter is a bias and like something that hinders your journalism, because I don't think it's fair to tell people that them saying that racism is bad and Black people should be treated the same as everybody else. Like, I don't think it's fair to for people to tell young journalists that them having that opinion is a problem or like hinders their reporting, because it doesn't. Like, that's just something that people should be allowed to say and allowed to be as a fact. And I think that the problem with objectivity is that when you tell someone that that's an opinion and not a fact, it kind of gives legitimacy to the other side, which is that Black lives don't matter. And that is really dangerous for media and for journalists as a whole to do, is to create that false equivalency and give false balance to things where there really shouldn't be acting as if both sides are valid. I think one example of this is like with the debate when Trump refused to condemn white supremacy, and like news outlets are like saying, well, at the debate, Trump refused to condemn white supremacy, but Biden did this. He told Trump to shut up, or something. Like, acting like those two things are the same is like it's not the same. It's okay to focus a lot on how Trump refused to condemn white supremacists, because objectively that is bad. So I think that the objectivity standard is a problem because nobody is objective. It's like we're just trying to force people to be something that they're not. Like, we all have opinions, and that isn't a bad thing. Like, as long as we're focused on the truth and focused on being fair, I think that it's okay if some people think that Black Lives Matter, because they do. I don't think that your credibility as a journalist should be diminished because of that. And like, it's just telling journalists that they have to leave their identity at the door in order to be a good journalist is a problem. I think that everybody's identity, whether or not you are white or whether or not you're Black or whether anything, it informs your reporting in some way. And that's not inherently a bad thing. I think as long as you're just reporting the truth and you're sticking to the facts, I don't think that expecting people to not have an opinion on things, I don't think that's right.
And Amora, you have a little bit different take on this, and you've talked about how your life experiences inform your reporting, but also what you think about objectivity. Tell us a little bit about your view on that.
So yeah, I totally agree with my panelists, but like my life, me being low income, me having to see my classmates go to juvie, me seeing, me getting tear gas thrown at me seeing the realities of like sharing your opinion in this country. All of those experiences, they shape me to be a better journalist because, like you guys said, like my bias is the truth. Like I will always try to go after the truth no matter what. And I think for me, objectivity is when you like take the truth and then that's like what you report. You know what I mean? Like we saying Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, that is the objective truth. Saying White Lives Matter is the objective truth, but if when you look at the equity of it, you can't really ignore that because it's objectively what the story is. And I think when you are choosing what to report on and when you are choosing like what is the most important thing in this country to report on right now, that should not be objective because you are a person and you should not be basically like a robot making articles. And when you are having that bias, it should be like picking out the person, like what Riley was saying. Like I choose to report on Black Lives Matter because I support Black Lives Matter. But the way you do that, I think, should be like where you just like report the truth, and that's like what you do. And you shouldn't like what he said earlier when he was saying like if you're going to share your opinion, make it very like discernible that is your opinion. Like say like this is what I think, but this is what the story is. And I just think like if you don't try to go after the truth, and if you don't try to like share like the sides of it to make sure everyone can, share the sides of it, but also, just report the truth. Because if you don't do that, then how can people learn who don't agree with you? How can people like educate themselves if they're only looking at your truth? They can't find something relatable to themselves unless they agree with you. So I think you should be conscious of that when you're reporting. I think when you go somewhere and you're trying to report on a story like about the KKK, for example, because you think, people need to like see the other side of that. I mean, you can call it kind of like morbid curiosity, but I think like when you go into that area, I don't think you should ignore the truth. I don't think you should say, well, white people are great and all, but I think I can support you. Like, you shouldn't be saying that to like get a good quote, or you shouldn't be saying that to expose both sides of the story, because you can't be truly objective as a human being, but you should always try to have the truth as a journalist and not using the truth as much as humanly possible is a disservice to your job. And that's what I believe.
Thank you. So we're going to turn now to our audience and ask you to share some questions for our panelists today. I see a few questions now. Just want to remind you that there's a Q&A portion of the go to Zoom, and you can just type your questions here. And I'm going to just start out with, I think I just saw one question here from Charlotte West to all of you, who asks, how can professional journalists best support you as young journalists and help elevate your expertise? And do you have any suggestions for us on how to cultivate relationships with young people as sources? Any of you want to tackle that first? Yeah, go ahead, Amora, and then Riley.
Okay. I think that the best way to reach out to young journalists is to go to journalism focused schools or try to find people who have student newspapers. Concerning the quoting part, I feel like you can find a young person if you really wanted to. And if you just talk about things that are, you're just like, well, hey, how do you feel about this? Because I kind of think this way. I am guaranteeing that anyone from our generation who has been dealing with like so much BS since they were freaking born, since their first, like since 2016, since before then, there's just been like what Paige said, a clusterfuck in our entire country, in our entire life. Just our whole generation's been dealing with it. I mean, I bet some people don't even remember the Never Again movement, where there was literally school shootings since anyway. But basically, if you bring up an opinion that's somewhat unpopular, if you bring up an opinion that that's just like affecting like a broad part of their life, they will guaranteed just like check you on saying, okay, well, here's what's happening in my life, because it's a personal like affront at this point to just say something wrong about how we feel about what we feel about, because we are struggling. We're basically inheriting a world that's just been just trashed and not respected, and human life is just valued so low. And the things that people held that were just so important before, they're just like, everything's changed for us. So if you just bring up an unpopular opinion, you can probably get some very strongly worded or just some some polite quotes in there, because it's a personal affront to just be wrong about it, because we deal with so much. We struggle so much with a lot of things that are happening right now. We're trying to put on a brave face and fix it as best we can, but we're feeling like little superheroes at this point. It's a lot.
And Riley, you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, I'd like to say try to treat them as professional journalists as well, because they might be professional journalists, and if they're not, then you should treat them as such and help them get accustomed to how the industry works. And don't be afraid to call them on stuff, like kind of like what Amora was saying, but the reverse. Like if you see them stepping out of line in some way or being unprofessional in some sense, don't be afraid to just pull them aside and be like, hey, that's not how we do things here. That's not how we act in a professional setting. And if they have their own, and don't be afraid to, this is going to sound contradictory, but don't be afraid to be open to their suggestions on how to change your way of doing things, since they might have their own way of doing it that's able to connect more with young people. You should be free to listen to their opinions and internalize them and sort of think, oh, well, if they say that they get the most traction by doing this thing, maybe we should try that too and see how it works. Don't be afraid to experiment and collaborate with them as equals and as peers.
Thank you. And Paige, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I think both for reaching out to young journalists and young people in general, just treating them as equals and showing them that you take them seriously. I think that something that's frustrating for young journalists and young people is just the feeling of knowing that people are looking down on us because they think we're younger, or we aren't as intelligent, or we don't know less. We don't know what it's really like to have it hard, or we didn't live through like World War II, so like we don't know what having it hard really is. I think just treating them as if like they are intelligent, like capable people, but also just acknowledging the differences between generations, and just acknowledging that just because things were different when you were younger doesn't mean that they're the same today. I think just just treating them as human beings, I think honestly is a good way to reach out to them, because I know young people harbor a lot of frustration of not being taken seriously. So just taking them seriously and treating them similar to you, the way that you would, I guess, and a source who is older, I think can really go a long way, because that's really what we all just want, is for people to recognize that we are just as capable as folks who are older than us.
Thank you. And we have a question from Jane O'Donnell, who Amora knows is the head of the Urban Youth Media Project. She says, how are you, or do you plan to address systemic racism in your journalism? And what will you do to assure the stories are balanced and don't only reflect your strong opinions? Go for it, Riley.
Well, first, covering the systemic thing, I would always try to show the big picture. Like if there's a story about one politician being corrupt or one politician tweeting something racist, I would tell that story and then maybe show how this is a repeated thing happening with all different types of politicians across the spectrum, or their history in politics, and show how up till now nobody's really called them out for it. I'd always try to show how this specific news story fits into the whole of the system itself. And as for, what was the second part about how to maintain balance?
Oh, how do you balance your own, and I apologize because in a question, oh, here we go. What do you do to assure that stories are balanced and don't only reflect your strong opinions?
That's a good question. I usually ask other people my age or ask family members their opinions on a subject, or I show them my writing and say, not only do you think this is good writing or not, but do you agree with what I'm saying? And if you don't agree, why do you disagree? I always try to search for the why people disagree with things, because that'll often tell you a lot more about the subject as a whole.
Thank you. Amora?
Yeah, hi Jane. So I totally agree with Riley, what he was saying about it, because one, for the systemic part, I am a very community-based person. I believe that is where a lot of significant change happens in people's everyday life, and that's what, the politicians should be looking out for in the first place. So when I see a politician or when I see systemic racism happening, I try to do like a closer look, and I try to focus on like the day-to-day person and like the life that they live, and how everyone is kind of just connected because of the systemic racism, because it's really a system that is just built on oppression, and it's built on hurting people of a specific race just because they are that race. And that's what I would do to write about systemic racism. And then for the other part about balancing things and making sure your opinion is not conveyed too much in whatever article you're writing about, I would say that I want to I do so what's similar to Riley. Like I show people my writing. I show them like, well, is this too far? Because I know I can be a very opinionated person. I'm a very passionate person. So when I write about things, it can sometimes come up as a rant in the first draft. But then as you slowly whittle it down, people will be explaining like why they don't agree with you. And then you'll be like, okay, well, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. So you research it, and then you're like, this is a whole other angle that I can look at it from someone who is completely different from me. And then you add that into your article. And it's all about just trying to find the truth in everything, because there's no way you can know what the truth is entirely, because everyone has their own truth. But when you ask enough people and you research enough, you will find something resembling it a lot, and you will try to find like the very best you can do so you can do your job correctly.
And Paige, did you want to weigh in on this point?
I just think that, I don't know. I think that it's hard to, I think it's hard to balance, like if, for example, as a woman, if like there are specific opinions that I hold as a woman because of specific issues that affect me, and I think that I feel frustrated when I'm told that I can't have those opinions or I can't speak out on policies that can have a really big impact on me because it might hurt my credibility as a journalist. Because I'm not a journalist first, I'm a woman first, and then I'm a journalist. So I think that that's the problem with journalism sometimes, is that the whole objectivity, idea of objectivity makes people feel like they can't speak out on things, or they have to give legitimacy to both sides when that's not something that we should be doing. I think that it's hard to tell a Black journalist that they can't advocate for Black Lives Matter. I don't think that's something that we should, as media, should be doing. And so I'm glad to see that newsrooms across the country are starting to reckon with these things. And I hope that eventually one day that we will get to a place where like communities advocating for issues that affect them, we won't see that as a detriment to their reporting.
We have a question from Mary Dolan, who says, although there is plenty of research to support meaningful youth engagement, do you feel that in general adults give lip service to the importance of youth voice and youth engagement? Go for it, Amora.
So basically, yes, there is a lot of research done because, you always want to entice the next generation. You always want to make sure, people who are going to be who are going to be around a lot longer and who are going to basically be carrying the entire industry later on and like decades later and even now, really. Not the entire industry, obviously, but basically, like when adults like research and they do that kind of thing, they don't actually talk to like the young journalists. They don't actually communicate with them. And I think that even if you do, you really can't understand what they're going through. So I think whenever you try to work with someone, or whenever you try to communicate with someone who's just trying to start out, or with someone who's like just trying to like understand what's going on, or someone who is like very new to journalism or things like that, you should definitely like have a conversation with them at first, because they're really like they want to make a difference, but they really don't know how. And when you give lip service and when you don't really even try to bother understanding who they are, you probably miss the opportunity to have a whole new person. And then I also wanted to talk about how, like, even if they're an accomplished journalist, even if they are doing amazing things like my other two panelists here, like, you still have to respect them enough to be able to say, like, hey, are you comfortable doing this story? Or like, hey, like, does it seem like it's right up your alley? Do you want to focus on this? Because when you just like kind of pick someone up and then you just like push them into different things, they're kind of just like scrambling and they don't know what to focus on and they don't know what to do. So even though you do all this research, you're not actually respecting the person themselves, and you're just trying to, like, it's like they're replacing the research for like an actual interaction. And I think communication is so important, especially as journalists, because that's what we're communicators, and when you ignore that part of the job, you're just asking for like some chaos.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this? I just want to return to something, Amora, that you said when we spoke earlier to this question about journalistic objectivity, which was to seek voices and perspectives of people whose views you don't necessarily agree with, or whose views might seem foreign to you. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I like to play the devil's advocate a lot. I know there's a limit to it, like, when things are just like obviously like Black Lives Matter, or when you just say like, oh, the people should die or something like that. Like, I feel like you should hear people out. I feel like you should like listen to what they're saying. I feel like you should have a conversation with them. But when you realize that it's not the truth, like you have a conversation with them, you write all your notes, you find quotes from them, you're like, huh, like I have a recording of it. I use everything from an interview. So when I get everything from the interview, I very thoroughly analyze what they're saying. I research it. I go to different studies, different like scholarly articles about it. Like I literally read, like I've read like over 100 pages for like certain articles because I love researching things and I love really getting to the meat of the story. So when I see that what they said is just a blatant lie, then I'll be like, well, they said this, but then next, like the next paragraph, I'll be like, and this is what actually is the truth. This is what happened. This is what, is this is going on. And like, I think that when you hear from different sides, it shouldn't be like they should all kind of support your one article, your one idea, because articles are so you can change them at any moment. There are a lot of angles that kind of bounce around when you learn more different things and new developments happen in it. And when you try to find out another side of it that you think could be interesting, I don't think you should be deterred from it just because it is there's a potential to give legitimacy to it. There's a potential to like provide them a voice that is just blatantly wrong and disrespectful and just horrible and mean. And I think when you put yourself out there and you try to actually discover what's happening with that, and then you do the research and things like that, you're kind of becoming a truth finder. You're investigating it for people who are not sure if that's truth or not. If you're believing lies, you need someone to actually prove to you that the lies are actually lies. But if the person just keeps giving you the blatant truth, then you're not really going to figure out like if the lies are wrong or not, because no one's really addressing them.
And Paige, go ahead.
I think one thing is just when we talk about not just like wanting to get a variety of viewpoints and reporters not just like writing about things that support their opinion. I think that there's a difference. Like I'm not so naive to think that the way that I think things should be done is the right way. Like I definitely like my opinion isn't always right, but I think there's a difference between people having different ideas on how to go about doing something or how to make a specific policy change or what the specifics of those policies should be. And I think it's important to kind of hear from all of those, because all of those sides are important. Like that's how you arrive at the right solution, is by having those important conversations. But I think it's important not to group that kind of disagreement and those kinds of opposing viewpoints with like making sure that you include all viewpoints in the sense that, oh, like I'm representing these people, but I'm also including racist viewpoints, or I'm also including viewpoints that can really harm people. Like I think that I don't think that every time I report on Black Lives Matter, I need to go get an opinion from someone who doesn't believe that Black Lives Matter, because that I think that's the problem with objectivity, is that it makes you think that you always have to include the perspective of the other side. And sometimes opposing viewpoints can literally just mean, okay, here are some people who they all agree that Black Lives Matter, but they have opposing ideas on how to achieve that. I think that there is definitely room and definitely a place for that in journalism, but I think that we should steer away from the idea of both sides, in the sense that every time we report on something, we need to go get a quote from the other side when we're talking about things that I hope one day that we will be able to acknowledge are true, like the fact that America is broken and that our institutions are a little like pretty racist. So I think that that is my my core issue with the whole both sides thing.
Thank you. And Paige, you've provided us with the perfect segue, but Riley, did you want to weigh in before I go to what would be our last question from the audience?
Oh, I think you guys, great. You guys covered everything.
Great. So just we have a last question, and it reminds me of a discussion we all had earlier about your, all of you sharing some pessimism about the future, but also a lot of commitment to trying to change things. So the question is, what has made so many members of Generation Z feel compelled or even obligated to facilitate change on both local and national levels? And what is the best way to go about covering young activists? So maybe weigh in on the first one, and if we have time, we'll get to the second one. But I thought you both had thoughtful answers on that first question. Go for it, Riley.
The question is, what causes our generation to be so passionate about changing the world?
Yes.
Well, a few things. Me personally, I think is sort of like it's kind of sad to think about, but it's sort of like we're the last generation, or like we're one of the last, or like the world's gonna end pretty soon. Like me and a lot of my friends all have this opinion, like, yeah, well, we probably won't live to be like 80 or even 60 because, the climate apocalypse will get us before then. And then after that, the world's just not going to be habitable for most people. So we might as well do what we can and just throw caution to the wind and do everything we can now to make sure that the life we have is the best it can be, or else we'll just be wasted time. Like, it's like once you know that you have a deadline, it sort of makes everything seem, at the same time, makes everything seem really nihilistic, but it also gives great importance to the limited time you have.
Thank you, Riley. Amora?
Yeah, I totally agree with Riley. Nihilism is a very easy mental state to kind of go into. It's very, like, you look at people who are kind of into like death metal and like ska or something, and you're like, you know what, they kind of have a point, like things are pretty bad. And you kind of adopt these really negative and pessimistic beliefs. But the thing is, I kind of think of myself as like a hopeful nihilist, because I always tell my friends, like, the world is ending, the plagues are coming. I'm just reading the Bible and Revelation, just waiting any second for these things to happen. Jesus is going to come, what I'm saying? I'm going to see Satan with his cloven hooves. It's like, I'm sorry to have so much like Christian things happening right now, but it's just like, it's very scary. And I live in a traditional Christian household, so I hear people on the phone talking about 666, having Bible meetings that are just like hilariously like, oh my gosh, people really believe this. And it's just, you hear, it's just like everything about like the end is nigh. It just comes forth. But for me, I see people who are younger than us. I see the little kids who run around. I see babies being born. We're having a baby boom right now because everyone's in the pandemic and there's really not much else to do in the house. And I see that I have the consciousness, I have the developmental skills to really make a difference and make a change. And when I write an article about criminal justice, I'm like, okay, well, these people, they deserve a chance to get out. They deserve a chance to have like the right to exercise their rights. I feel like they have the right to appeal their sentence. Everyone should be given a second chance right now, because we are all like basically given a second chance, because we have been careless about energy. We've been careless about our emissions. We've all been careless, whether you know it or not. Like, it's just been such a careless effort into protecting and saving and preserving the earth. So when you see all these things happening, you want to be hopeful, you want to make a change, and you want to just encourage and make everything better to give the entire new generation a chance to really do exactly what you're doing, but just do it better because you paved the way for them. So I see our entire generation as basically like heroes. And I think that when you take yourself out of that just completely negative mindset and you use it to motivate yourself to do better and to make the world a better place, I think that's where even though you know that you're not going to have much time left, you're making it so that people can have hope in the future, and you can have hope right now for them and for yourself as well.
And Paige, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, like, what other choice do we have? Like, we were just kind of handed this world where so many things are broken, and so many things, like, I mean, they suck. And it's like, we either can try to change them, or we just have to deal with it. And I mean, nobody wants to, like, this isn't the world that we want to live in. So, and I think that we're all pretty, like, we're not so naive that we think that things are going to get better on their own, because if that were the case, then we probably wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. So I think it's like, I mean, trying to change them is really our only option, because we all have a lot of time left in our lives because we're young. So unless we want to just keep living like this for decades to come, we just have to try to do what we can to change it.
Well, I'm going to let Paige have the last word here, and I want to thank all three of you for your thoughtfulness and your eloquence. I've just been so moved by everything you've had to share, and I know that's not just true for me, but from some of the people who are attending this, who I've heard from in the chat, and I just wanted to call out something that Kaylee Fagan said, which is, very few things give me hope and make me feel good about the future of journalism these days, but you three have done it. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom. And also a note from Joseph Orozco, who is the founder of a Native American radio station in far Northern California, who wrote, "As ethnic journalists and journalists, we need to raise the voices of who is not being shared in mainstream media and explore who is in control of media voices." So I think that you've given us all a tremendous amount of food for thought. We're going to be archiving this webinar at centerforhealthjournalism.org. We don't typically do a webinar like this, so it'll be all the more important that you who are attending this weigh in on our survey about your perspectives on this webinar. And should you want to support our webinar series, you can do so simply by sending a text at the information that's here. And thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for our audience for their wonderful questions. And I hope you all have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us this platform.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for allowing us to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much.